So elite capture really refers to different organizations that come from China that spend a lot of time investing in relationships, and we've seen this broadly over the last 25, 30 years. Is that the Chinese have invested very heavily in political leaders and business leaders, and giving them preferred access to the Chinese market, and sweet deals within the Chinese market. This is to lock them into a kind of dependent relationship, and I think that this has made Canada have tremendous challenges in terms of confronting um, a country that really wants to change the global order in a way that is contrary to Canadian interests.
Welcome to Inside Policy Talks, the podcast of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I'm Jamie Tronis, Executive Director of MLI's Washington, D.C. office, the Center for North American Prosperity and Security, or CNAPS. I'm here today with Dr. Stephen Nagy, who's joining me from Tokyo. We're very excited to have him to the show. We're going to be talking today about the state of the Canada-U.S. relationship and the fact that it's hit an all-time new low, and how China has moved very quickly to position itself to benefit from this fallout. Canadians should be wary. Here's what's playing out. Beijing is seeking to court Canadians with trade deals, but simultaneously punishing Canada for adopting anti-Chinese trade laws, which, as the Chinese are quick to point out, were implemented by Canada in response to American pressure on its northern neighbor to crack down on unfair Chinese trade practices. Now we're seeing growing numbers of Canadians twisting the logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They're taking that to mean that the enemy of Canada being the United States, and that by that logic, the People's Republic of China might be our friend by necessity. To talk about this, we have Dr. Stephen Nagy, who's a professor at the Tokyo International Christian University and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He's studied and written about Chinese influence operations in the West, among a variety of other topics. You can find some of his latest work on our website at cnaps.org. Welcome.
Thanks, Jamie, for the generous introduction and for having me.
First of all, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about Chinese influence operations and how they work. What do they do? How do they operate in Canada?
So this is a great question, and Chinese influence operations come from Soviet influence operations that were initially kind of formalized in the 1910s and 1920s to try and build internal momentum to support then communist revolutions with Marxist-Leninist principles. So I think the three key words that I'd like your listeners to kind of hear is that these information operations or disinformation operations focus on inflating narratives, corrupting narratives, and hijacking narratives. And I think that these are really interesting ways to be thinking about how disinformation works in society. So inflating narratives is obvious, I think, trying to create a mountain of a molehill, if we use a Canadian expression, is to try and, for example, say Mr. Trump wants to really make Canada into the 51st state. Corrupt narratives is to really, change what change the truth. So does Mr. Trump really want to, make Canada the 51st state, or is there some other underlying reason? And again, I think they would like to corrupt this message so that Canadians feel the threat of annexation. And the last one is this idea of diluting information, is making the information less tangible. So what we see in the Canadian-US context is China really trying to create a wedge between Canada and the United States by, again, corrupting the kinds of information that is coming from the United States and creating narratives about its trade policy. It's diluting information about what is really happening here. For example, Canada has tremendous layers of cooperation with the United States still today in intelligence, police services, regulation, pharmaceutical regulations, transport across the borders. We go across U.S. borders with our passport almost with no problems. the levels of cooperation is infinite, and they're trying to dilute this. And then lastly, I think the idea of inflating narratives is really also something that we're experiencing in our mass media, and businesses and organizations that are interested in promoting stronger relations with China, borrow these narratives as well, and pursue their policy objectives by hijacking again some of the Chinese wedge policies that exist between Canada and the United States.
Excellent. That's a very strong overview. You had written a piece for us that's you can find again on our website, synapse.org, that talks a little bit about how they operate these influence operations using economic incentives and things like elite capture. Can you talk a little bit about elite capture and what that means in Canada?
So elite capture really refers to different organizations that come from China that spend a lot of time investing in relationships. And there's a difference between investing in relationships. Our Japanese friends, or South Korean friends, or American friends, they also invest in relationships, but they don't cut off those ties when there's a disagreement or arrest citizens. So there is a different kind of objective. So what we see with the Chinese in terms of elite capture, and we've seen this broadly over the last 25, 30 years, is that the Chinese have invested very heavily in political leaders and business leaders, and giving them preferred access to the Chinese market, and sweet deals within the Chinese market. And this is to lock them into a kind of dependent relationship. And it makes sense. It's very, very smart kinds of elite capture politics. And I think that this has made Canada have tremendous challenges in terms of confronting a country that really wants to change the global order in a way that is contrary to Canadian interests. So that's one aspect of elite capture, capturing politicians so they take policies that are a little bit more pro-Chinese, or they don't take policies that that make it more difficult for China to prosecute their interests in Canada and North America. The second is business access, and I think this is something that we see quite a bit, where businesses are brought on trade, they're given preferred deals or low taxation, and that access gives them a certain inclination towards Canada-China trade. This happens all around the world. The difference is when you have disagreements, what we see is this preferred access gets squeezed. So this is another kind of elite capture. And those businesses advocate for strong Canada-China relations. The third is scholars and think tankers, bringing them on nice trips to China. And it's usually business class. They get some nice Peking duck and high-end chicken and some wonderful food and access. And this gives them a sense of privilege and understanding of China that is perhaps different from others. Now, these three levels all kind of work simultaneously, because the scholars and the think tankers that come back after these wonderful visits come back with quite favorable views of China, and then they advocate for those favorable views in Ottawa. The business is the same. They come back and say, listen, we need this. We need this access. Our businesses need this to be competitive, and they lobby political parties to push this agenda. And then again, the elite capture, so politicians, and they also want to maintain the strong relations, in particular if their constituencies have strong connections with mainland China. So there's a lot of different levels here, and they interact with each other. And I think we're seeing it play out in Canada right now with our debate about where we should be going with our Chinese policies.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see. There's been a number of op-eds and various reports in the media. I think anyone who can, is interested. There was one that was in the Globe and Mail, which was so slanted towards the PRC that my colleague Balkan Devlin quipped that it was probably better in its original Mandarin. So we are seeing a lot of these influence operations coming from people. That's not to mean that everybody has been taken over and we have to be concerned about it, but just that maybe we should begin questioning certain narratives that are out there in the media. But I think people who also, the interesting thing right now that's going on is that people who are not perhaps maybe as sympathetic to the PRC, who are not sympathetic to China, but are finding themselves really getting angry and frustrated with the United States in this moment. We're talking about threats of annexation of the country's sovereignty, tariffs, people losing their jobs because of the economic situation. That's some of that is directly involved because of the United States. And so they're starting to say, you know what, maybe we should be looking at China. Maybe we should be talking about the PRC. Why shouldn't we just let BYD have access to our market and have cars come in and make it cheap for everyone just to spite Donald Trump? There's a lot of that we're seeing, not just necessarily in the political class, but just people every day talking about it, just out of a knee-jerk reaction or to reflex reaction to what's going on with our situation. Can you outline or discuss a little bit about how dangerous that kind of thinking might actually be when it comes to some of the ramifications of how China has been and will continue to be exploiting those feelings, and what kind of policies they might be looking to get Canada to enact?
So Jamie, that's a whole bunch of questions. So let's first start with first principles. The current state of Canadian economic growth and unemployment, immigration problems. Frankly, we have two succession movements happening at the same time. They happened well before Mr. Trump became the president on January 20th, 2025. These are made in Canada problems, and it's not just because of the previous government, although I think the previous government exasperated all of these issues with poor governance for 10 years. The reality is that this has been, again, because of elite capture, a problem in Canada for 20 years or 30 years. So we should be apolitical about this and say, hey, the problems in Canada with our economy are really because of Canadians and the choices they've made about political leaders. Where China comes in here is that they understand that Canada is the kind of the weak underbelly of the United States. And if it can foment divisions in Canada and create more challenges through disinformation, that what happens is this creates a divide between Canada and the United States. And this impacts a lot of different aspects of North American relations. It affects the North American Free Trade Agreement, so NAFTA 2.0, CUSMA. This is a source of strength, supply chains, resilience, industrial might between three great countries, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. It impacts our ability to work within NORAD, NATO, and other security operations as well, because again, we lose trust in the United States because of the disinformation. So this is the security dimension. And then third, and I think even more importantly, is this wedge politics creates a division between Canadians and Americans who have traditionally been thicker than thieves, to pardon the expression. When 9/11 happened, we welcomed tens of thousands of Americans to Newfoundland, to Alberta, to many provinces, and they stayed in our homes and our hotels until things settled down. And we've been really side by side with the United States. And again, I think that they use these tactics to separate the people-to-people relations, which then again creates a vicious circle that causes our relations to deteriorate. So this is one, I think, big way to understand it, that Canada's problems are made in Canada. We can fix these, and this will strengthen our relationship. Second is that the Chinese view us again as a liability to exploit, to again create problems in the United States foreign policy, because they want to weaken the United States comprehensively. And then third, again, I think that they use these wedge politics at the economic level, at the security level, and the people-to-people's level to further their broader strategy to outcompete the United States by making it more difficult for us to cooperate and work in synergy.
Great. That's a very comprehensive answer to a long list of questions. But I do tend to agree with you that, my household is a dual citizen household. So we're very much akin to, the tension in the relationship between the two countries and trying to navigate that. And because, we do watch Inside Policy Talks. We're familiar with a lot of the other discussions that we've had on Canada policy, and how some of these problems really did stem from the previous government. I would agree with you on that. I was wondering a little bit about, again, just going back to China's specific goals with Canada. We know that they view us as a underbelly, soft underbelly to the United States. What is it that they're trying to get that soft underbelly to expose? What is it that they're trying to do to weaken the relationship, not just to weaken the relationship, but to weaken the West by exploiting the Canada side of things?
Okay, there's like lots of questions there. So let's think about China's long-term strategy. That we generally understand it in terms of the twin centenary goals. 2035, 2049, they want to be a rich, strong, well-respected country. And they want to have a first-rate military or top-tier military that's on par to the United States, and they want to be respected in the global community. So I think these are the broad centenary goals. And how does it achieve that? It does this by internal strengthening, building signature industries, whether it's EV vehicles or cornering the critical mineral processing and market, or building solar panels and other markets. So they want to be a leader, and that's what a legitimate interest that many countries have. But only a few countries really can do that are big enough to be the kind of legitimate and powerful country. So this is what they would like to do. And I think they see the current rules-based order that's eroded quite dramatically over the past year and a half, 3 years, as an obstacle to those objectives. So the post-World War II order, for most countries, had international law. For most countries, had rules of how we behave on the seas and in terms of trade, and in terms of how we treat our own citizens and other citizens. There was an understanding, but I think that the Chinese Communist Party has a strong view that this current order, I think the order is dead, and a new order is coming, prejudices the one-party state and prejudices the views and the ideas that come from civilizations and countries that lie outside the West. So they have a deep interest in redefining, we call this discourse power, what democracy means, what human rights means, what rule of law means, what development means. Because for them, they have a very different view of these concepts. And here's a plug for the Decoding China project that's out of Europe. They do a great job of deciphering all these, and I encourage you to put it in the link. But when China means democratization of the international system, they want more voices within the system that weaken Western and U.S. power or dominance. So they want to weaken the U.S. and win this competition. And one way to do it is to create wedges between the United States and the plethora of allies that it has around the world. It's not just Canada, Mexico, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, European countries. And they do this by putting those wedges into the relationship. And in the context of Canada, because of our geographic proximity, our deep integration at many different levels, if it works properly, it's a force multiplier in terms of U.S. power, but not only U.S. power, North American power. If it works poorly, it can be exploited to weaken the United States. And if it weakens the United States effectively in terms of economic synergy, intellectual synergy, technological development, security cooperation, and then lastly, people to people, then this has the effect of weakening the United States in a way that makes it less able to compete with China. And I think that this is ultimately how it sees Canada, as a liability for the United States that can be exploited if wedge politics is properly deployed.
Very interesting. I think that there's, a lot more to be said too, just about how influence operations have happened in Canada. It's been quite well documented with parliamentary inquiry, with the Murray Hogue inquiry, and the NSICOP report from Parliament. Just a lot about how foreign interference has has entered the political chat, as it were, and continues to do so. There was a lot of discussion about Elections Canada released a report saying that foreign interference hasn't had a significant impact on Canada's recent election, which I think a lot of folks found surprising and perhaps, hard to believe in some cases. I'm wondering if you had a chance to, or if you've thought much about the visible ways that China has influenced Canada's politics, not just our electoral politics, but our whole democratic and political system.
Well, I'm viewing the influence from Tokyo or from the Indo-Pacific region, and I see similar trends here. So I think they have, and we see some prominent Canadians advocating for strong, what they say, normalization of relations with China, and to remove the anti-Chinese bias from our discourse. And sometimes they even use the word racism or discrimination against China and Chinese Canadians and Chinese interests. Prominent senator actually made mention of this out in Vancouver, founding an anti-discrimination NGO, making it difficult for us to have these kinds of discussions because I'm not anti-Chinese whatsoever. Actually, I think, to be frank, we must have strong economic relations with China, but economic relations that are based on Canadian interests. And if you go to the prairie provinces, 17% of their trade is with China. We need to respect that they have strong interests with China and they benefit from that relationship. So we see, again, China influencing the debate by creating these narratives that anybody that says, we should rethink this relationship is being racist, which I don't think at all. We also see they inflate comments or views that the United States is not a rules-based country, that it's eroding in terms of its political system, that Trump is a dictator or an authoritarian leader, that we should distance ourselves from. I mean, there's a lot of ways that they influence how Canadians are thinking, and I find this quite worrisome. There's a few organizations in Canada, I'm not going to mention them, but they work closely with the local consulate and the local embassy, and they host events there. They get trips to Beijing where they get preferred access, as I mentioned, and that they're all about advocating for strengthening bilateral relations. And for businesses that are feeling the pressure from the Trump administration, I think I see why it's a convincing argument. But at the same time, I think we need to be very clear that the current mindset about China in Ottawa is not an Ottawa neurosis. It's actually a consensus in many countries, right? And again, this prominent senator made the comment that, we don't have a logic about China and we have a neurosis. And I go, no. Actually, Ottawa's views about the challenges in this relationship are shared privately in South Korea, in Japan, in Southeast Asia, in survey after survey, in Australia, in New Zealand, in most of the EU, and of course with America, our closest friend and ally. It's not an Ottawa neurosis. It's actually something that there's a big consensus about the challenges in this relationship, but also the benefits. As I said, I think we should be very clear that the Chinese economy is really important for the global community. Supply chains are important for the global community. They're based there. China has lots to offer in terms of environmental solutions, dealing with global challenges of development. We have a lot that we can work with, but there's some serious problems like interfering in our politics and the deployment of disinformation and threatening friends like Taiwan and Japan and South Korea and Lithuania. So how do we manage this? It's the biggest question, I think, for leaders in Canada. And my general sense is that as opposed to taking a strong position that America is our enduring partner, they've done, and that we need to work with the United States and invest in strengthening the North American industrial model and be on the table, not on the menu, in terms of all the new initiatives, that the easy choice has been made to demonize America, demonize Mr. Trump, demonize many aspects of changes that are happening in the United States, and to try to strengthen relations and diversify to countries that have a real track record of coercion and challenges in how they manage not only the bilateral relations between Canada and China, but also many countries.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the point about diversification of manufacturing. Here I'm south of the border, but farther south of the border from Canada, the Latin American countries are sort of wondering why they lost the market share on being America and Canada's manufacturing powerhouse. They have a huge generation of people who are ready to work, who ostensibly are well educated and ready to be trained, and economically, there's some good reasons to set up business right here on between North and South America. And so having everything go to China, I think even the Trump administration is saying, why not come back to our own backyard? If not America, why not within the Western Hemisphere? And we are seeing here in DC a stronger emphasis on bringing manufacturing back to the Western Hemisphere, not just for the United States, but for the whole continent. And that is something that when I do speak to Trump officials down here and to other government officials, they're very, very powerfully concerned about, really wanting to bring more to the Western Hemisphere. So I think that's another thing that we're starting to see. And alongside that, we're also seeing China getting its back up a little bit about that. I was speaking to some folks from Mexico this morning, they were trying very hard to say that, the United States is our number one trading partner. And yes, we do a lot of business with China, but they're like 14 or 15th, and it's like orders of magnitude of difference. If we lost Chinese investment, next week, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But if we lose the United States, for us, that's catastrophic. And I feel like Canada is kind of in the same boat in some things, but on other things, we're very dependent on our trade with China. Canola, we have farmers who are very upset right now, and not sure what to do with their crops. So the situation is definitely one that I think, I won't have all the answers to today, but it is something that I am heartened to know that governments around the world, as you said, are really looking at these policies and trying to figure out how do they tackle the PRC and the influence campaign, while also being able to engage with China as an economic trade partner. I was wondering if you had any final sort of comments for us, or if there's any questions that I may have asked or shouldn't have asked. I'd be really keen to know just kind of your final thoughts on where do we go from here? How do we move forward with this situation with China and its attempts to wedge us away from the United States and to weaken our relationships, while also trying to build back some of our trade with China as well?
Lots of comments there. So I'm a firm believer that Canada and our political leadership needs to clearly articulate what Canadian national interests are. And I don't think we've been very good with this. And I want to be apolitical about this. I don't think the Liberals were good at this, and I don't think the Conservatives were good with this. And the now disappeared New Democratic Party was not good at this either. What is Canadian interest? Canadian interest is good governance at home, peace and stability, an economy that is prosperous. And in order to do that, that means we must have the best possible relations within North America, because we share, 8,000-kilometer border with the biggest and most powerful, most dynamic economy on the planet. That's not going to change tomorrow, next year, or in the next 100 years. So for me, this is in our national interest to absolutely have the best possible relations within North America. The second is to be part of every single rules making process around the world. And I always use the expression be at the table, not on the menu. So as we explore the Indo-Pacific region, we want to be part of the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. If it's possible, part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. If we start to build AI regulation, we want to be part of the regulation. If we're part of security frameworks, we want to add what Canadian capabilities provide. So we want to be part of everything. In the European context, we want to make sure Europe is stable and economically dynamic and able to deal with the challenges that it's facing on its eastern front. These are the core priorities for me. And of course, the Arctic is incredibly important as Russia and China work together in that sphere. Are those our national interests? Yes. Are our national interests in the Middle East? Arguably, no. And it's a tragedy what's happened between Israel and the Palestinians. But should we be investing our limited resources there? I feel that maybe this is not a good investment. What about Africa? I think Africa, we need to continue to invest in building stability, but do we need to put so much in Africa? We're small. We are not such a big country. So I think really thinking about our resources, how can we get the most bang for the buck? Once we've developed some real sustainability in a successful policy, then maybe spread it. In this sense, maybe we can learn from the Chinese. Back in the 1990s, Deng Xiaoping said it doesn't matter if it's a black or a white cat as long as it catches mice. He built 7 special economic zones that were the start of the Chinese economic miracle. In this sense, as Canada is engaging in the world, we need to choose those areas that we can build credibility, build momentum, and then build from there into other areas. We just can't be everywhere all the time. Another point is I think we're still lost in a 1990s middle power identity that we can do good everywhere. We just can't. I think we need to be much more realistic, regionally focused, and pragmatic on who we work with, rather than thinking about shared values, but shared national interests. Lastly, and I think really importantly, and Ryan Haas, the former president of the Council of Foreign Relations, said this: we need citizen education. What does it mean to be Canadian? What is Canadian priorities? What is Canadian strengths, weaknesses? Where should we be going? So we create a more cohesive country that is connected to each other. And there's a lot of ways to do this. In schools, maybe we set up a 6-month or 1-year program where Canadians volunteer in other parts of the country with other Canadians. So we get to know people from Quebec or Newfoundland or British Columbia or the Yukon. But I feel today's Canadians don't really know each other. And as a result, we don't have that shared national interest and shared view what Canada is. There's a lot of ways to engage in citizen education. I'm just putting things on the table that I think could build a more cohesive Canada that can, when voters will start to think not only of their local interests, but Canadian interests, and then vote in parties and leaders that represent Canadian interests, not a certain part of the country.
Very good. Very well said. I think we always should keep Canadian interests in mind. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining, and especially thanking you, Dr. Nagy, for joining us. Reminder that if you've enjoyed this conversation, please remember to like and subscribe and also share. For MLI and Synapse, I'm Jamie Tronis, and thank you for joining us on Policy Talks.
Thank you.